Good morning and welcome to Beacon, a radically inclusive religious community that strives to feed the human spirit and heal the world. I am Nicole Jacobson, your ministerial intern, and leading today's service is the Reverend Dr. Robin Tanner. And whether it is your first or 101st time joining us, we are so delighted that you decided to commune with us this morning. Please take a moment to say hello in the chat. Maybe you'll make a new friend, or maybe you'll reconnect with someone you haven't spoken to in a while. And don't forget to tell us where you're viewing from. Our theme for the month of November is holding history. November and the Thanksgiving story can have some very difficult truths. They can be tough to hear and talk about. Telling the truth and listening to the truth takes courage and a willingness to see the rights and wrongs of our ancestors and to work toward a future that does not repeat those same wrongs. Today, we will explore how we can help ourselves and communities develop the courage to tell the truth. As the great poet Maya Angelou once said, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if we faced with courage, need not be lived again. And that is our goal, to not relive past pains. Thank you.
Across the globe, including through the United States and within our Beacon congregation, there were celebrations this past week for Diwali, the Festival of Lights. Celebrated by Hindus, Jains, Sikhs, and some Buddhists, as well as many Unitarian Universalists, we kindle our chalice today, which is a diya, which Reverend Robin will light, loaned from Dr. Tuli Patel, who is in Boston this weekend with our coming-of-agers. Diwali has many teachings, among them knowledge conquering ignorance, an awakening, a light. So may we each in this time, including our youth who are traveling, and each of us, continue to experience the unfurling and blooming of greater wisdom, insight, and truth. We share now a video of Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram, popularized by Gandhi during the Salt March and often sung during Diwali as the celebration of Lord Ram.
रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम रघुपति राघव रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम रघुपति राघव राजा राम पतित पावन सीताराम पतित पावन सीताराम पतित
It's a Wonderbox Day! Our Wonderbox was made for us by our friends in Transylvania and holds all kinds of things for us that make us wonder. Sometimes the things we find in the box help us to tell a story, and sometimes they help us remember things, like how to be kind and try to care for one another. The Wonderbox can also be about how we can hold special memories and even people in our hearts, no matter how far we are from them or how long it has been since we've been together. I like to think of good memories like a wonder box that I can go to in my mind whenever I need it. If it's been a hard day, sometimes I can think about opening that box and selecting the right memory.
So, have you guys ever had a really bad day?
Yes.
Give me some details. How bad was that day?
Really, really bad.
What happened?
I do care. I was just my parents got incredibly mad at me.
Your parents got mad at you.
Once I had a really bad day because I got a 60-74 on my test.
Oh, you got a bad test grade. That stinks. You worked for you studied too, didn't you?
Excuse me.
Yeah, and it just didn't work out. That happens sometimes. Yes, Julian.
I had a bad day today.
You had a bad day today? What happened?
Just one bad part because I accidentally spilled my water.
Oh, you spilled your drink. Yeah, that would make me sad too.
Open cup.
Oh no, and it went everywhere, huh?
It was much bigger than that.
It was much bigger than a tiny splash. It was a big splash. That happens. Oh, yeah. Getting shots is never a celebration. It's just not. But it's necessary. Keep us healthy. Well, you know what, Abby? Come on up here. I want you to open this box. Are you ready? Alrighty. So I'll help you lift it because the lid is kind of heavy. I want you to reach in and pull out what you got. What's that? Do you guys know who this frog is, though? This frog is a special frog. Who is that frog?
I think it's called Benji.
Oh, close. This frog, can I hold it, Abby?
Is it Kermit the Frog?
Her name is Shanti. She is Tuli's friend that came over from India, and she actually is about to go into hibernation because this time of year, Samhain, or All Hallows Eve, is when it's basically the end of fall, the end of the harvest season, and the beginning of winter. So it's almost time for Shanti to go take her winter nap. What else do we got in there, Abby?
I wanted Kermit the Frog.
Oh, can you reach it all the way in? I'm kind of putting it out your hand. Go ahead, reach it in again. What is this?
Kermit. A chalice.
That's a chalice. That's a chalice.
It's upside down.
Oh, it's a chalice, and we consider this to be one of our treasures because this is something that's a symbol of our congregation, of our faith. So, Abby, you can put that right here on the table.
Where's Kermit the Frog?
And last but certainly not least, let's reach in one more time and grab one more thing out of here. Can you reach in? Go. Boop. What is that?
A bat.
Is it a bat?
It's a monkey.
Is it a monkey?
Bird. It's a monkey.
It's a kind of bird. It's an owl. It's an owl. What do you think that owl stands for? Ella? Well, it stands for wisdom. Amelia, that's good. Naomi? Our whole lives, absolutely. And our congregation's commitment to learning about our healthy bodies and taking care of them. And it has a pin on it that says, just say no. But instead of no, it's K-N-O-W. It means just say, I want to know. Because our commitment in our congregation is to wisdom, to finding out answering those questions and sharing that knowledge with each other.
Today's Wonder Box, as you can see, held many treasures. Shanti the frog, right before she heads off into hibernation. A stuffed owl with a button that says, just say no, reminding us of the importance of learning about our bodies. And even a chalice, reminding us of all the times we've been together here at Beacon. When we are done enjoying our treasures, for some of us it might be time to put them back for another time when we take a quick peek to make sure everything is fine and to know that when we need to, we can open this Wonder Box again and again and see what's in there. As Unitarian Universalists, we know that life is beautiful and also sometimes hard. We believe in the power of spiritual ancestors and in the community right now to help us be more free, more loving, and to take care of our earth. I wonder, what would be in your Wonder Box when it's had a hard day? What memories or people or places could you open up in your mind to help you when things get hard? What would you put in your Wonderbox. Here ends our story for all ages.
Good morning, Beacon. It is my pleasure to lead this morning's candle lighting where we celebrate the fullness of our lives. Our lives have ups and downs, good days and bad days, joy and sorrow, struggle and celebration. Each week, we at Beacon honor the fullness of life. Let us begin by putting our hands to our hearts. Feel the beating and our collective presence. We invite you to enter into our chat the name of a person or place that is struggling so that we can hold them with you. Today, we light a candle for all those choosing not to receive a COVID vaccination. With each candle lit, may each of us know that we are held in the love and care of our community. I feel joy that more and more of us are getting COVID vaccinations. Joy and blessings are all around us, beloved. Lift up a celebration in your life, anniversaries, beginnings, endings, and healing. We celebrate you. Beloved, for these gifts and so much more, we give thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sally Gloam-Raymond, and it is a pleasure to share a snapshot of how Beacon has enriched my life. Over the past 2 decades, Beacon has been a supportive community to learn from and to share my gifts and joys, as well as my challenges and concerns. My husband Dan and I started coming to Beacon in 2002, along with my then 8-year-old son, Tyler. We found an open-minded, smart, and passionate community, one that felt authentic, socially conscious, and impactful. We found worship that nurtured our spirit with wisdom from the pulpit and beautiful music that resonated in our hearts. The children's religious education, particularly our whole lives and coming of age programs, created a life-affirming foundation from which my son, now age 27, has launched his own amazing spiritual journey and search for truth and meaning. A truly ongoing blessing to watch unfold. Our leadership has gifted me many opportunities to deepen my spiritual roots and cultivate deeper compassion for and connection with my fellow congregants, friends and family, and the wider world by inviting me to facilitate covenant groups, assist with worship services, support the music ministries, afternoon music concerts, and more recently, to serve as a chaplain. What stands out for me over the years about Beacon is our go-to attitude and commitment to walk our talk. We have lighted candles, attended vigils, chimed bells and gongs, marched together, tied ribbons, and strung banners to raise awareness on important issues of our time. We've prepared meals and hosted families in need, and participated in many, many small ways, such as pancake breakfasts, barbecues, and other fundraisers, which over time affirm, promote, and sustain our collective causes and UU principles. My hope is that sharing some of my Beacon experiences illustrates the larger story of how together, you and me, we create this community and its shared covenant. Our mission comes alive through our relationships, our voices, our leadership, and our gifts. Now is the time to give generously to support making this mission come alive in both our lives and in the world. In a minute, you'll see ways to contribute to Beacon. We invite you to lean into this practice of generosity. I know firsthand it makes a difference. Thank you.
A poem by William Stafford, Remembering on the Freedom of Childhood. When there was air, when you could breathe any day if you liked, and if you wanted to, you could run. I used to climb those hills back of town and follow a gully so my eyes were at ground level and could look out through the grass as the stems bent in their tensile way, and see snow mountains follow along, the way distance goes. Now I carry those days in a tiny box wherever I go. I open the lid like this and let the light glimpse and then glance away. There is a sigh, like my breath, when I do this. Some days I do this again and again.
It was 2013. Brian Williams was being interviewed by David Letterman, and it was kind of a bland interview with some back and forth banter between the two, until David Letterman asked Brian Williams about his experiences as a war correspondent. That is when Brian Williams recounted a story about being on a helicopter in Iraq that he had told dozens of times before. Except this time, Williams says that he was in the helicopter that was hit by fire. Nearly as soon as the interview airs, Lance Reynolds, a flight engineer who was in the helicopter that was hit that day, replies, "Sorry, dude, but I don't remember you being on my helicopter." The media cycle, of course, picks up, and it soon becomes very clear that Williams was not in the helicopter that was hit. In fact, he was 30 minutes behind the 4 helicopters that came under fire, one of which was hit. Williams is ultimately suspended for 6 months and demoted. He's mocked on media all around the country, and for a news anchor and a journalist, this is just about his worst nightmare. Nearly everyone assumes he has intentionally lied and made up this story for self-aggrandizement. But there's the problem, says Malcolm Gladwell in his podcast. Gladwell describes what is called a flashbulb event. It's a dramatic or historic event that gets burned into our memories. However, when a flashbulb event occurs, social psychologists have learned that we tend to be more certain of the memories, at the same time, paradoxically, that those memories are likely to contain discrepancies, particularly when the story is told again and again over a lengthy period of time. Gladwell jokes that we humans are memory fundamentalists. We strongly believe the exact veracity of our memories and assume the same of others. There's a study that was done shortly after September 11th, which is a significant flashbulb event, that looked at exactly this phenomenon. They interviewed subjects in the days after September 11th, again a year later, again almost a decade later, and on. What they found confirmed the theory. People would report shortly after the event, "Yes, I know exactly where I was when it happened. I was in my kitchen. I remember that I was making breakfast," and on, these particular details. Then, when interviewed a year later and subsequently a decade later, with equal certainty, they would say, "I remember I was in a coffee shop. I was a couple blocks from my apartment, and I remember being worried about how to get back to my apartment." They would recount these details. Now, I'm not getting paid to defend Brian Williams here or to argue a case. But the evidence that perhaps Williams was among those with faulty memories deepens when we look at the apology he later made. Matt Lauer interviewed him and really pressed Williams on how could you have falsely remembered this. And you can hear Williams' kind of befuddled answer, trying to make sense of this himself. He can't quite understand how he's misremembering something. Seems Williams may be a memory fundamentalist too, but at the same time, he knows he has to apologize, and he knows that no one believes that he did this accidentally. And so he says, "There must be some ill intent, a desire within me, something bad to be smarter or better that made me do this." This month's theme of holding history is surrounded by this deep question of truth and the veracity of testimony. In the Me Too movement, individual women have been debated as to whether they remember all of the details and if that is proof of the veracity of their testimony. I say this gently as a survivor and as one who has trauma-influenced memories, some of which I now know are not entirely true. And I have spent decades of my life trying to determine if I can trust myself. You see, this month's theme is not abstract or an interesting psychological experiment. It's our daily lives. And as Unitarian Universalists, this question of holding history is soul work. How do we hold history if we can't trust the details of even our own memories? Against the backdrop of psychological research, we also know that oppressive systems considered totalitarianism or systemic racism tend to suppress the truth. You only need to study the prophets or the story of Moses versus Pharaoh to see this phenomenon. This is one of the most incredible things I discovered when I first heard Reverend Dr. William Barber speak. It wasn't that he was a good preacher, which he is. It wasn't that he is charismatic, which he is. It was that he was simply and plainly telling the truth. And it was revolutionary. We also know that generational trauma often involves the conditioning to not tell the truth. We know that our bodies can remember things that our minds may have lost. Dr. Joy DeGruy describes what she calls in her research post-traumatic slave syndrome. She talks about how generations of behaviors and lives for African Americans were shaped by not only living through the system of slavery, but for the generations that followed this system. As an example, she describes how an enslaved mother would never praise her child publicly for fear that they would then be sold off. She describes how it's common to this day in many circles within African American culture not to brag on children, and contrasts this with the praising culture that is common in American white communities. Consider today the strong reaction by many parents to the teaching of critical race theory. Now, of course, you have to get below the political polemic beneath it and talk about the content of the curriculum. But even when we talk about the sheer facts of the content of the curriculum, what we hear from many parents, white parents, is a fear of their children feeling guilty. There's a desire to shield children from truth. And yet, in my own experience, it is that shielding that causes far more harm. What is truth? How do we hold history? Are we doomed in this circular argument of knowing what is true and the limitations? To quote Shakespeare's Macbeth in Act 5, Scene 5, after he has murdered his king to become king, has been haunted, and then just received news that his wife completed suicide, Macbeth delivers the famous lines. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Is the pursuit of truth, sound and fury, signifying nothing? I hope not. That would be an abysmal sermon. What struck me, beloved, about Brian Williams as a case study is first, the desire to find a hero or some sinister intent. There are, as we know, no perfect people, no perfect survivors, no perfect stories. I believe we have to hold history as a collective. Individual stories, the particular details of dates and times and places may not be trustable in their precision, but people as a community to source their stories and truth are deeply trustworthy. If history is a collective, then we must be willing to accept that there's more than one truth at a given time, particularly when we begin to create collective truth. And that while the discrepancies can vary, we can trust women, because I may not remember, was I in the kitchen or I was at the coffee shop, but certainly September 11th did happen. And that is the flash of the light bulb. Interpersonal violence and harm does happen, even in the most trusting of situations that should have been safe. We don't need a video of events to verify that. This is not a courtroom, but a congregation, a community. The Me Too movement shows how we hold history as a collective. Tarana Burke, Me Too movement founder, is embodying this practice. Me Too, collective history making to change futures. History holding is soul work, deep listening that moves beyond the sensational and takes us into the spiritual. Even in the individual stories of peoples, places, and entire movements, we can engage a deeper listening. In this way, our children can't possibly be crushed by guilt, shame, or horror, but instead empowered by a greater truth and the trust in telling them. Holding history is also about sourcing strength to get ourselves right, to tell the truth, to receive the truth. I love how the children in our Wonder Box named the things that bring them comfort or joy and strength. It was a Wonder Box of resilience, if you will. How can we as adults develop a similar practice of our own Wonder Box? A place where we draw not only on our own remembering, but the histories of resilience, strength, courage, brilliance, and insight. Practices to center ourselves in this soul work and to heal in this soul work. In the words of Dr. Cornell West, who reminded us this in 2015 at the Ware Lecture at the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, he said, quote, "I just want to be personal tonight because I come from a Black people for 400 years, terrorized, traumatized, stigmatized, but the best of our tradition is what? Generating the love supreme of John Coltrane, the love ethic of a Martin Luther King Jr., the love sensibility of Frederick Douglass and an I.W. Wells Barnett, and in the music of a Stevie Wonder. What is it about these people that in the face of being terrorized, they continuously dish the love? That's partly," he concludes, "what Charleston is all about. Those folk don't come from the sky. They come out of a tradition fundamentally to love in the end, no matter what the situation is." Holding history is soul work. It's gifting ourselves and our children and our children's children's, not only the stories of things that happened to us, but how we lived, how we responded, how we changed futures. Love work. Sometimes this begins in small circles based on experience and identity and may move into larger communities as we widen the circle. William Stafford's poem that we heard at the beginning of our time together suggests that longing of childhood where it was easier or simpler. It feels like a dangerous privilege trap, right? To tell a story of a child who has a life when there was air, when you could breathe any day if you liked, and if you wanted to, you could run. Stafford speaks of opening a tiny box to remind him of that feeling. I ask you, beloved, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to dissect a story for the details? Or are we trying to midwife a history that gives the earth and her inhabitants a future? To move from the sensational to the spiritual? Because if it is that, then we aren't competing for the truth of the contents of a wonder box. Instead, we are teaching ourselves collectively, I hope, what it is to hold history in a way where there is a future for all of our children to be able to breathe, to remember with wonder the liberation for which we were made. We don't get there, to that beloved community where systemic injustice has been erased, eradicated, dismantled, and where justice exists, just relationships, just systems where people can be liberated. We don't get to that beloved community unless we learn how to hold history, facing it with courage and compassion, with the practice of pulling out the stories that tell us we can do hard things, that sustain us, as well as taking the stories that are hard to put forth, hard to tell prophets in our home. We get to that beloved community by creating a space. Creating a space, not to dissect the details, but to go deeper, to trust us. And together, open with wonder to the air, to liberation, to courage, to compassion. That, beloved, is a holding history that we are called to this day and every day as Unitarian Universalists. So may the illumination of that truth call to us.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word.
Beloved, even as we extinguish this light, it may take me a moment to extinguish all the lights of the dia. I wish you a greater light that can't be extinguished. This light that gives courage and compassion and joy to hold history. This light that can move us beyond the attacking of individuals or the particulars of one story, and move us instead into the strength of a new story, one that we must write for the sake of our grandchildren's grandchildren, if they are to be. So in the week to come, beloved, may you be gifted with moments to be the light, to shine your light, and when the way gets hard, to remember to open that wonder box and call on those stories of strength in your bones as stardust. Blessed be.